We're live here. We're doing it live. Again, thank you so much for coming out on. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, do that.
Thank you especially for coming out on Sunday at 9 a.m. It is like literally the hardest panel to get people to come to because everyone is drunk and hungover. Rightfully so. I mean, that's one of the reasons I come to conferences is for free booze.
Matt, do you want to talk about it? Do you have a problem?
I do actually. But so this is a comedy and activism panel. We're going to introduce the panelists. We're each going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then what's going to happen is we'll talk. I'll ask them some questions, but also there's notes being passed around that you guys in the audience can ask questions. You can also use, if you're on the live stream, you can also ask us questions with the hashtag #NCMRComedy. I'll be monitoring it, so ask questions via Twitter. Also, if you're in the audience, you can also ask questions via Twitter as well. So let's introduce the fine panelists here. The person right here, immediately to my left, is she's a stand-up comedian, she's a writer, and an on-air correspondent on the amazing show Totally Biased with W. Kamau Bell. She is, right? That show's awesome, which just got picked up for a full-time show.
Thank you.
In addition to that, she's also with Kamau and Nato Green, part of an amazing comedy tour called Laughter Against the Machine, which is having a documentary that's going to come out this year. Give it up for Janine Brito, everyone. Right next to Janine, we have another stand-up comedian who's been seen on Conan, Countdown with Keith Olbermann, Showtime's The Green Room, what else? Melissa Harris Perry, Up with Chris Hayes. He is, of course, also the host of the Badass podcast, along with Allison Kilkenny, Citizen Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamie Kilstein.
Hey, Allison.
Next to Jamie, we have a great Denver comedian that the Denver Westward has called an energetic powerhouse. She's also, no, actually, I meant that wrong. The Denver Westward called energetic powerhouse. Sorry, Kristin. They called her, quote, one of the most gloriously authentic, irrepressible personalities in the city. She's been all over Denver's big rooms. She runs the showcase Delusions of a Ranger every third Wednesday at the Beauty Bar in Denver. Everyone, Kristin Rand. And next to her, we have another Denver-based comic. He's a member of the Comedy Works rotation. He's performed at comedy festivals all over the country. He's also a lawyer. Whoa. What? A comedian lawyer? Everyone, Troy Walker. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Matthew Filipowicz. I am the host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipowicz Show. It wasn't taken. I've been part of the, I guess, progressive Netroots for quite some time. I'm also an animator and a stand-up. My work's been on the New York Times, the London Times, Ain't It Cool, which for nerds is awesome. Yeah. I know, that was like the biggest one.
That's the best one, yeah.
So what we're going to talk about today is comedy and activism. So comedy can be a lot of things, folks. Comedy can be smart. Comedy can be really stupid. Comedy can also be friggin' racist. Comedy can be friggin' sexist. Comedy can be insanely homophobic. But I want to talk about how comedy can actually be inspiring. Like when I was a kid, I listened to my parents had it was back when vinyl existed, but before vinyl got cool again. So my parents had like vinyl of George Carlin's Class Clown, and when I was a little kid, I would sneak the vinyl away, and like I had the entire album memorized from start to finish. And I would go to my Catholic school in Omaha, Nebraska, where I was born and raised, and I would just like level off the 7 words you couldn't say on TV. It was, and all my Catholic school friends were like, ah, because they never heard that before. And then even when I was a little older, Carlin, when Carlin was just kind of goofy, but then Carlin got really political. I had these sort of like political awakenings in myself, watching other comics, like watching Bill Hicks as a kid, just like, exactly, right? And so like, you have these like moments where comedy can be something that awakens something inside you, something that awakens you politically, that spurs you on. I mean, like right now, like right now, Kamau's show with that Janine's on is an amazing, badass show. Like, it's like, okay, so I like The Daily Show, I like The Colbert Report, but there's a point of view on Totally Biased that, I mean, Colbert and The Daily Show are actually kind of different, but there's a point of view that's on Totally Biased that's much more hard-edged than what you actually find on The Daily Show. And that's badass. I mean, Jamie, is like my favorite stand-up. And like,
what? You didn't call me that.
No, you are, dude. You're friggin'. I mean, like, Jamie inspires tons of like punk kids around to activism with his show, with his comedy, and like. So, I mean, in that way, comedy can be inspirational and actually get people awakened as youth, or even, any age, that you can hear something a comic says and be like, fuck yeah, let's take them on, right? That happens. But, like, there's another angle that I'm going to talk about here, and that's kind of, because we're all here in a media reform conference, we're all fighting for, media justice or whatever. Something I've said at conferences in the past is something that I believe. I'm going to say it. I hope I believe it. Is that I actually think that comedy can be a gateway drug to issue advocacy, right? So like, it's something that's smart. It's funny. It's quick. It makes you laugh and giggle. But it's not something that like There's not a magic bullet here, right? It's not like comedy can entirely change the world. But it's something that groups, progressive groups, groups that are fighting for justice, can use comedy as a way to get people's attention. I mean, like, okay, so many groups will have, decent, YouTube videos or ads, and, starving children or whatever you're going to see. It's like it can be a gut-wrenching ad, but if you have a funny ad that actually gets, that makes people laugh. It's a way to get people in the door, essentially, and get them, and through that, and that's when the activism work actually has to come in. Because again, comedy, it's not a magic bullet here, people, but you can use comedy to actually get people interested, or at least get them to listen. Because, I mean, some of the stuff, like, we're at a media reform conference, like stuff like, you try to explain to someone what net neutrality is, and like their eyes glaze over, right? They just like net neutrality. Well, you see, there's the internet, and there's bandwidth, and there are these corporations, and then there's like, and they start to drool when you're talking to you. But if you can make them laugh initially, and they're like, oh, this is interesting, you can actually maybe get them to be more interested and be down with the cause. But like, the last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the panelists here is something that I think is kind of important, but I mean, having been to all these panels this weekend as well, that I think is sort of a broader problem that I think anyone who's in a justice group, a progressive group at all, that's fighting for whatever your cause is that there is certainly a lack of infrastructure that supports us. So there's a lot of money in being fucking evil, right? So the right wing has the Koch brothers, they have Karl Rove giving them millions and billions of dollars, but it's not just as a gift. It's an investment for them. It's an investment for them. They know that they have these organizations, they have this media that they create. They are setting the narrative. The left does not have that, and as a result, the left, we get our asses friggin' handed to us time and time again. And again, there's not a magic bullet to this problem. It's not that like, there's no money in being good. That's the problem. There is no money in actually trying to do good and to try to work for justice in the world. But and like we're all working comics and trying to pay our rent. But if you're a progressive group, feel free to. I want to end on this. Feel free to try to use us, I guess. Use comedians and use comedy, because a lot of us are people who really believe in this stuff and believe in the causes. If you're a satirist, you have a point of view, and you care about what you're talking about. And so, comics, they won't do it. Well, maybe they'll do it for free, but they'll do it for less than they charge an evil corporation if we were working for an evil corporation. So again, that's the last thing I'm going to say. Feel free to try to use and abuse us for the cause of justice. Thank you. And Janine, take it.
I'm not going to be, let's bring the energy down. Everyone lower your expectations. Let's see, comedy and activism. No. I guess when it comes to comedy and activism, I would agree. I do think that comedy is a gateway to a lot of issues and is a great way for people that don't really that are fairly apathetic to brush up on important things and then be inspired to get involved. I make the distinction myself. I do think comedy is an activist activity, but I don't call myself an activist. Because I did activism in college, and I understand that the people on the ground work way harder than I do. So I have respect for them and don't consider myself an activist. Lots more comedy, and we get nachos in comedy. I don't think you guys get that when you guys do rallies too often. But I saw a panel yesterday with Jeff Chang and Fabiana Rodriguez, and they made a lot of points that I agreed with as a comic. Theirs was focused on arts and culture and activism. And the things they highlighted were basically sort of, I guess, the same respect that I have for activists and not calling myself an activist. I would ask the progressive community to have the same respect for artists and stand-up comics. And sort of the point that Jeff and Fabiana were making were to recognize the importance of cultural change to affect policy change. And also to acknowledge artists before the end. I think a lot of times progressive groups kind of bring us in and they're like, make a poster, like do some comedy, and we're kind of not brought in throughout the process. It's not a conversation, it's just kind of like, let's sprinkle this in here, you're gonna be great. And I think it's important to recognize that doesn't always work. Artists can't be given a list of bullet points, can't be given a time to just be on and go. I think that relationships have to be formed long before to kind of let the artist incubate in your ideas and what you're trying to do so that we can be genuinely inspired and not kind of force something at the last minute. I think that's much more effective for those two branches to really work together and affect change alongside each other. This is not funny at all. I'm so sorry. I'm just being really rambly. And I think a big part of that, a big part of comedy's advantage in making change is that, it sucks that we're in bars and rowdy rooms a lot of times, but it's also amazing because we reach people who you guys can't reach. And we kind of reach people in this environment where their guard is down and they're just there to laugh and they don't realize that they're getting a message alongside it. And I think that has enormous value in the fight for progressive change. Yeah.
Cool. Jamie.
Yeah, so it's weird because I don't want to call myself an activist either because you're right, like, getting on stage and being like, hey, isn't the word penis funny, is like nothing compared to like occupying, a building. But at the same time, I don't want to call myself a comedian either, really, because I hate a lot of comedians. And I think I'm old enough now where I can say I'm hating what comedy has become. Like, I'm like, the kids with their horrible rape jokes. Like, honestly, what I loved about Hicks and Carlin is that they went after powerful people. Like, the reason I became a comic, and I think the reason a lot of us became comics, is because we were nerds. And, I became a comic because when I would get picked on by bigger kids or meaner kids or more confident kids, I was like, I could still make a joke to myself and feel like I won the day. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, well, I can be funnier than you or I can be smarter than you. And it almost became this, like, defense mechanism, you know what I mean? Like, comedy sort of became like my jujitsu, where like I could like take on these bigger people. And this thing happened recently where all those mean, better looking, popular kids in high school, suddenly they started doing comedy and they started being mean in comedy. And I'm just sort of like, get the fuck out of here. This is my space. This is for the nerds. What are you doing here? Like, go back to like putting kids in lockers. Like, I don't want... This is our safe nerd space, and you're ruining it with your tap-out shirt. Like, I hate all of you. And it's like, it's become the worst where, like, it's controversial now to say that, like, rape jokes aren't funny, or it's controversial to, because they say, oh, well, you're just politically correct. It's like, no, I'm a decent person. It has nothing to do with being politically correct. And then they act like they're the edgy ones. Like, I literally saw a dude on Twitter, this comedian, make a rape joke, and people were not about rape culture, I think you should be able to talk about whatever you want. You know what I mean? I think talking about rape culture is important. You know what I mean? I think comedians should have the freedom to talk about these issues, but they act like they're edgy by making fun of someone who was raped. Like, no one's sitting at a comedy club being like, who's had it too good for too long? People who were raped. Like, no one wants to see it. There's nothing edgy about that. So, like, this dude makes a rape joke, and people are, like, getting offended, and he starts retweeting people who are saying, like, yeah, well, people were offended at Carlin, too. And I'm like, are you comparing yourself to Carlin? Like, these comics literally think they're edgy. It's like, there's nothing edgy about defending the patriarchy. That's like the most generic, oh, it's about time someone stuck up for white men. It's like there's nothing edgy about that at all. So I really think it's cool that a lot of comedians and activism, because of the internet, because of Twitter, because of podcasts, because of indie comedy shows, it's like, if you don't want to play those comedy clubs, if you don't want to go on Comedy Central, if you don't want to do that stuff, like, you don't have to anymore. And, I really feel like the reason that, I love when conferences like this combine art with activism is because, like, look, I dropped out of, I don't know if you guys saw, but yesterday when I hosted the keynote, a white dude, rushed the stage, and he wanted the microphone. And he goes, give me the microphone. And I didn't want to be mean, so at first I was like, no, thank you. Like, I didn't know what to say. And then he goes, give me the microphone. I went to Berkeley. And I was like, well, I dropped out of high school, asshole, but I have the microphone right now. So you're not going to get it. And I really think he was this awesome microcosm of, like, so I did drop out of high school, right? And when I first wanted to become political, I was like, all right, well, I don't hate gay people, so I guess I'm a liberal. And I really wanted to be political, and I would watch the news, and I'm like, this is step one. And it was just these rich white dudes. You have David Brooks talking about, like, well, I can empathize with the Latina housewife. And it's like, no, you can't. And I felt like they weren't speaking to me, and I think that's that moment where someone can go from wanting to be political to maybe being apathetic, right? Because, like, I felt stupid because I didn't know what these people were talking about. None of them looked like my friends. None of them looked like anyone that I would, talk to ever. And so I felt dumb, and I didn't want to learn about politics anymore, and it was easier to be apathetic and kind of shit talk at the bar and then not do anything about it. But then, I saw Bill Hicks, and, like, that comedy just made it, like, tangible and digestible for me. And once I didn't feel stupid and I didn't feel alone, then suddenly I found Amy Goodman. And then I started, getting really serious about politics. So I really like what you guys said about it being a gateway drug. I think it's a really important way to reach kids who otherwise, who don't know they give a shit yet. You know what I mean? And that's it. I think I talked too long.
Kristin.
Good morning, everybody. Glad you're all here. Hope you guys didn't party too hard last night. I think the man in the 7th row sleeping probably partied the hardest. Oh my God. What are we talking about? Comedy here, comedy and activism. You did, I think that I can speak just on behalf of not comedy in particular, but just laughter in general. The universality of laughter is a wonderful point to insert all kinds of ideas. Carlin said that, like, at the point of laughter is where you can insert whatever kind of idea you want to with the crowd, and we all like to laugh, and I think that comedy is one of the most friendly ways to kind of get a message across. It's not aggressive. I mean, it can be aggressive, but I think that we want to laugh and hear new things and have good ideas. I think comedy, even if your act isn't political, like my act isn't necessarily very political, but you can use comedy to do benefit shows or to do awareness shows, and that's another wonderful way to kind of use comedy in an activist role. And you did say it's not a magic bullet, but I do think that it's a really good lube. So that's all I have to add. Thanks, guys.
Troy.
How's everybody doing? I think that comedy is really, really good for activism because, to me, it's kind of inherently subversive. kind of at its heart is blowing up expectations. It's, you know, taking you one way and then coming back the other. So I think it's really, really good as a tool to sort of take what somebody's thinking and punch holes in it. Because I think part of the reason for that is that, like Kristin was saying, laughter is very primal. It's, you know, you really don't have too much control over when it happens. Something's funny or it isn't. And because of that, it's a really good way to make a point really sharp. It's almost, you don't even have to necessarily explain what your point is. As long, if the joke is effective or whatever, people get it immediately and it will click. So, I mean, I think you can see that Daily Show does it every day. Totally Biased does it all the time. You take these things, you watch them just rip people apart for saying ridiculous things. I mean, anytime I watch Stewart just go at Fox News, it's the best. It's the clearest, absolutely clearest way to show how ridiculous whatever somebody's saying is, because of that inherent like response that somebody has. So I think that it's a really good tool for any kind of activist thing. I, like Kristin, my act's not especially political, but the things that I have in there, I think I can make my point very, very quick and very succinctly with, you know, just a joke. So I think as a tool, it's one of the best things you have as far as pushing ideas and expanding people's minds.
I want to piggyback on something Jamie said, because I think it is true. There is a lot of bullshit in comedy, but I think it's really important for us to shine a light on the misogyny and the sexism and the homophobia in comedy. But I think it's just as important because, as you said, it's true. It is a huge world, and there's a comic for everybody, really. And I think it's just as important for us to find those good, righteous comedians and beat the drum for them just as loudly as we do when we criticize people, because it's so important. Because I mean, our show, Totally Biased, the unique voice is, frankly, women and people of color. That's what, because we have those people in the room. And I think that we do a lot of things differently on our show because we have such a diverse staff. And I think that the reason that came together is because people rallied around Kamau, and the network noticed. They were like, hey, this guy has a huge fan base and can make us money and can get us ratings. And he was able to accomplish that because people were beating the drum for him. And so it's important for us as a community to do that for other comedians so that more voices get on television and reach a wider audience. And so we see the points that we want to see be made nationally be made. It's up to us to beat the drums and let mainstream media know, hey, these people have support and they need to be showcased, and it'll put a buck in your pocket, which sucks, that's the bottom line, but we can use that to our advantage.
Yeah, no, yeah. I agree. Where, first of all, I thought you said reach a wider audience, and I was like, no. Yeah, and you know, something that Troy said, like, it doesn't have to be necessarily even overtly political. You know, I don't want it to make it sound like, you know, I only like comedians who have military-industrial complex jokes, although I do. But you know, there's a way to make everything political. There's a way to be political through storytelling. I think if you're just honest, you know, like I had this on my CD. Like I was never gonna tell this story because like I just thought I was the political guy, but I have this story about like my relationship with my dad. And so many more people sometimes would come up to me after the show and talk about, you know, their relationships with their father. And I was like, yeah, but what about the abortion thing I said? And they're like, right, but my dad. And, you know, Kimia was saying this at the keynote, Kimia Dawson, where sometimes when you can reach someone just on that personal level, you know, and sort of touch somebody and make somebody think, you know, that they're not alone, this sort of thing that they thought maybe they were the only person that did it. I think that's really political too and really important. At the same time, though, I do feel like, I don't know, I feel like if you're funny and if you're political, I don't think we have a responsibility to do something, but there are so many people in power that don't do anything. that I think that, you know, there does come a point where actors and artists and, you know, graffiti artists, comedians, musicians, you know, if no one else is going to say something, I do feel like we should if we can. And it's hard. I mean, you don't get booked talking about politics. Like when you made a joke that, you know, what we're saying isn't necessarily funny this morning. It's not every interview I do about comedy. They're like, so, like, what you talking about in your act? Like, notice anything about the city? And I'm just like, 25 people were killed in Palestine this morning. and it's horrible. But at the same time, like, there are ways to make everything funny again without, like, laughing at the people who are suffering. And I don't know, man. I mean, I do think it has come to a point where, like, even when I watch progressive people who I like I watched Bernie Sanders last week on Chris Hayes' new show, and he was saying these great things about climate change. And then he was like, yep, I just have to bring it to the people in Washington. And once he said that, I'm like, oh, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. Whenever they're like, well, we just got to talk about Congress. And I'm like, goodbye. Bye thing I was excited about. But how do you make it happen? Direct action. And I think that artists have the power to influence direct action. I mean, look at where we are with LGBT rights. Look at where we're starting to get with immigration rights. Why? Well, because the LGBT community didn't do the thing that you see, you know, Chris Matthews always beat off about when he's talking about bipartisanship. All these pundits on TV, you watch them, and they're like, well, you know, what people are really sick about is the bickering in Washington. Like, I miss the days where this Republican would just, like, sit on this Democrat's lap, and they would make out and write a bill together. I'm like, I don't miss those days. I don't want Bernie Sanders having lunch with the right wing. I want them actually fighting for us. I want them to disagree. But the problem is they don't. I mean, it's this rich old boys club. They don't give a shit about the issues we give a shit about. But the LGBT community just put the pressure on them. And they said, we're not going to support you just because you have a D under your name. You actually have to do something. And now you have all these mainstream politicians supporting them. And, you know, Occupy Wall Street did that. And I think that change is going to come from the grassroots. It's not going to come from people who need contribution money. It's going to come from artists. It's going to come from activists. And I do think we have a responsibility. Until things get a little better, I think everybody has the responsibility to scream as loud as they can about these important issues.
So I'd like to I want to ask this, and then I'm going to actually go to some of the Twitter questions we got. And then again, you people in the audience, if you have questions, you can write them on the slips of paper, and we'll bring them up, and then we'll go over them. But I guess the first question I want to ask you guys, so Janine, you said you don't really consider yourself an activist. And I know that's actually something that a lot of even political comics kind of have that distinction where there's some people who say, well, I'm just a comedian. I mean, like that's what, you know, Jon Stewart will say, I'm just a comedian, I'm not an activist. I guess kind of I'd like you guys to kind of describe, do you consider yourself an activist? Oh, I mean, because I can't watch Totally Biased and see your routines without, I'm sorry, I would consider you an activist just by watching your act. Because what you're talking about is unbelievably important. And I kind of want to just kind of get just the idea of what the distinction is in your guys' individual minds of why you either do or do not consider yourself an activist or not.
Well, I guess I make the distinction because I recognize the difference in time, just the hours on the ground. I don't do that anymore because I chose to switch my focus to comedy. And then also just mentally, when I'm on stage, my main goal at that time is to be funny and make people laugh. And I personally choose to do that by pushing pressure upward and saying things that I believe are right. But on top of all that, I'm like, the end goal is to make people laugh. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of think that you are not giving yourself enough credit because we're artists and we hate ourselves. So we're like, we don't do anything important. Why are you here? Good night. Buy my CD. Because I think that, because I've wrestled with this too, right? Where like, so my wife is Allison Kilkenny and she writes for The Nation, and she's like, you know, on the ground for the, I mean, God, we went to Chicago, and I just remember like a cop like running at her with like a baton, and her like just getting out of the way. And so then, yeah, for me to get on stage and get to introduce a Evangeline Lilly and to be like, yeah, me and my wife are the same. It's not. It's not the same. But at the same time, you know, we started Citizen Radio to sort of reach all the people that we're talking about now. And, you know, I don't want to call myself an activist because I'm not doing the things that they're doing. You know, we have 15-year-old kids who are writing in, and they're like, I started a gay-straight alliance at my high school, and these are like freshmen. And I'm like, when I was a freshman in high school, I was just like trying to make it so my parents didn't smell the weed on my clothes. Like, I wasn't doing anything. And like, I think that's so awesome and motivating, but I think that, I don't know, I kind of think that by doing political comedy, by shining a light on these issues that aren't being covered on the news, by being funny about it or inspiring these kids, I sort of think that that can be a different form of activism. You know what I mean? Like, sure, we're not on the ground on the streets as much, so you don't want to take credit away from these like legitimate activists. But if they saw you and you inspired one of them or 5 of them or 100 of them to be that activist, I think that's like another form of activism.
Give me a hug.
Yeah, do it.
Aww.
We're all activists.
Before we go to Kristin and Troy on this, I would actually argue that that's actually what we're feeling right now, like the kind of hesitancy to even call yourself an activism, and the hesitancy that maybe people in society have to call themselves activists is the problem. And the fact of the matter is that we have been told that we're not supposed to be engaged. We have been told that politics is just what happens in DC. And that I think is a big issue, where it's like, you know what, if you do anything to make the world a better place, I would consider that activism in some way. And I think that, like, and not to like, you know, say that, like, you know, obviously the people who are camping out at Occupy camps, who are there for, you know, days and days and days, there's a certain level of hired badassery on that. But I would say that I think that we've been taught that we shouldn't be activists, and that even when we're trying to do something good, that we shouldn't call ourselves activists in some way.
Well, I mean, activism has sort of become a dirty word, like
exactly.
like radical has, right?
Yeah.
And liberal, or you have like Democratic politicians being like, well, I'm not really a liberal, and it's like, well, you're not, because you're cutting our Social Security, but at least like say you are. Like, Jesus, like, when did we become so afraid to admit these things? Like, one of our first, Allison and I, our first interview of like a big person on Citizen Radio was Ralph Nader, right? And he thought he was calling into like a real radio show. I don't think he knew what a podcast was. And like, Allison and I, we couldn't have equipment, so we had to do the interview on our cell phones. And like, if we were in the same room with each other, feedback would happen. So I literally interviewed Ralph Nader from a bathtub in my studio apartment in Queens. And like, anytime it'd say something cool, I'd run out to give Allison the thumbs up, and like feedback would be like, meh, and like I'd run back to the bathtub. Like, it was crazy. But he said this beautiful thing where, you know, we asked him about if he considers himself a radical, and he was like, there's nothing radical about wanting everyone to have health care. There's nothing radical about thinking everyone deserves an education. Like, these aren't bad words. And, you know, I went out to lunch with Kate Ellis, who's this great activist who you should all follow on Twitter.
It's Kate Crockford. Her Twitter handle is Kate Ellis.
Sorry.
ACLU of Massachusetts.
It's one Kate on Twitter. Oh, I'm the worst. And, you know, the word radical, I had no idea about this, but the word radical just means truth. You know what I mean? So like, there's nothing radical about truth. There's nothing radical about sticking up for people. And I think we should like take those words back. Like, when people on the news go, oh, are you one of those like radicals? What does that even mean? Like, one of those people sticking up for democracy? Like, yeah, okay, I'm a radical, sure.
Kristin?
I would say that I'm only an activist in that I'm actively pursuing what I'm most passionate about, and that I have the platform to say anything that I want to say without fear. So I feel like I'm only an activist in that respect. You guys are doing a lot more on the political front for sure, and I respect you guys. Like, I appreciate you guys doing that. I feel like I'm worthless, and I just tell jokes about how much I like food and stuff. So.
You could say like sustainable food, and that's
right. Organic, yeah, ethically raised food. Okay. So I believe I'm only an activist as far as being able to like maybe be an example for somebody else, to be like, oh, look, she's doing whatever the fuck she wants with her life. I should maybe do that too, and be, you know, confident about what I believe in, and stand up for myself. So I think that's maybe the only way I could say I was an activist. But.
Absolutely. Troy?
I don't really consider myself an activist exactly, but I do think that as any kind of performer, I think you have a forum to convey ideas, and I think that can lead to, you know, you can change people's minds and things like that. I would never say that I explicitly go for it. If I see something that I think is absurd in, you know, the political arena or something like that, then I might comment on why I think that's the case, and I suppose that, you know, might change somebody's mind, but for the most part, my act is, you know, video games and not getting laid, and I wrote something about koalas the other day. Like, it's not really that, like, serious, but I do think that that forum carries with it a responsibility and also, you know, an opportunity, I guess, and I just try to make the best of that and use it effectively to just, you know, reflect myself, and to the extent that I have an idea, I put that idea out there, whether it's political or not, and see what people think about it, and see what they do about it. And that's all I do.
I want to respond. I personally make the distinction between myself and the activist, not out of shame, but as a reverence to the activist. And I think the way I think about it is you know, there's, you know, the greater machine of the revolution, and I myself don't consider myself the front lines. I consider myself the drum circle of the revolution, a little bit. And so, like, it's just a way for me to kind of recognize my place in the scale of badassery.
Yeah.
And that's why I make the distinction for myself personally. And then for you guys, I do think you guys are selling yourself short, because even though you might not talk about, you know, politics on stage, I think anytime just the act of a woman or a person of color or a gay person or a trans person getting on stage and saying anything is in itself a political act. I think anytime an other gets on a stage in a room full of people and speaks about anything, that's a political act. For me personally, that's what I believe.
And we're going to go to questions, but one thing I want to add to this, I actually do think, you know, not to pat ourselves, I actually think, I do find, like, some people, I do actually think there is value in also entertaining our troops too, and actually like the people who are the real activists, no, the people who are activists who are actually doing really hard work and, like, you know, doing campaigns and occupying and all that stuff, giving them a moment of levity and rest is actually something that actually I find there's a lot of value in that, and actually being part of, you know, the progressive movement is gigantic, and having those voices and giving reprieve to people who are getting pepper sprayed and beaten by police officers is of value as well.
So and I think also being the whisper campaign at the beginning, kind of getting that message out and sneaking it out to people that they wouldn't reach otherwise is also valuable.
So let's go to some questions here. Let's see. The first one we'll go to is from on Twitter from Exile in Flyville, or Joe as I know him. This is an interesting question. It is, if your politics evolve or change, do you ever end up apologizing for old stuff, or should you? And that's an interesting question, because, like, I can tell you, like, man, some of my early comedy when I was like, it is the most horrific stuff, and I look at it and just like, it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that was funny. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I don't think anyone knows what those jokes are. So I mean, if you do, I'm sorry. but I think there's also some controversy about. I guess we can go to, like, the Oscars and sort of like, should comics ever apologize if they cross a line? What's the value in that? Like, because the Oscars has two different things, where it was what's his face, the Family Guy.
Don't pretend like you don't know his name.
I'm tired.
Seth MacFarlane.
Yeah, he was a sexist piece of shit.
He's a sexist piece of shit. Yeah, and doing like a sexist routine. Making fun of women who had their breasts exposed, when most of the time they were in movies where they were literally being sexually assaulted, and like that, ha ha ha, you're on film exposing sexual assault, that's so friggin' funny. But then like that, and so I think the Oscars should have apologized for that, because they fucking cleared that shit. It's not like that wasn't written in a vacuum, you know. That was a routine. It existed. Many people, friggin' suits signed off on that damn routine, you know. And so, but then you have The Onion, who apologized, and a lot of comics got really upset at The Onion for apologizing about the tweet but like I actually thought what The Onion did was kind of cool. I thought they were like, you know what, I think we crossed the line here, and The Onion has a long history of doing amazing satire, and like, you know what, maybe we crossed the line here by if you guys know what I'm talking about here, when The Onion tweet. Okay, so The Onion during the Oscars live tweeted about the little girl that's in what's the movie?
Quvenzhané Wallace.
Exactly.
Thank you.
About yeah.
White people.
I couldn't pronounce it if I
I
tried.
could bring something to the table today.
But I don't even remember what was the tweet about.
He just, I think they called her the C word.
Yeah, exactly. They called her the
She's
C
9.
word.
Right?
Yeah, and she's 9.
Get
and
it?
Yeah.
Hilarious.
And like the intention of the joke was to kind of show that the vapidness of Hollywood, but I think the joke was ill-informed, you know, and I actually kind of respected that the Onion was like badass enough to go, you know what, that wasn't our intention to do this, but you know what, we crossed the line and we're sorry, and it was wrong, and I gave them respect for that.
I think that case highlighted how context is key.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if that had been an article and the Onion had been able to delve into the nuance of what they were trying to say,
yeah,
it would have been funny.
right.
But you can't get context and nuance in 140 characters on Twitter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you need to recognize the medium that you're working in.
I mean, I almost think we're giving comedians too much credit because, you know, a lot of times, like, I don't know, you know, did the person who write that, is he, I was going to say he or she, but, like, let's be honest, a sexist, horrible person? There's a good chance that he's not. And, you know, with comedians, what people forget, so comedy's hard. And I know a lot of really smart, funny people who are really progressive and not sexist and not homophobic, and they get on stage and something terrible happens. Like they're just possessed by, like, Daniel Tosh. I was going to say the ghost of Daniel Tosh because secretly in my head I was like, maybe he died while I was doing this panel. And where they think that's what comedy is. And so, like, and I was that person. Like, when I started comedy, if people called me out for language, I would be like, you know, you just don't get it. You just like free speech. But it had nothing to do with free speech, you know, like, it just had to do with, like, me being lazy, you know? Like, if I said the word retarded and someone was like, hey, that's really hurtful, I wasn't like, you know, I'm going to go on the campaign to liberate that word. It had nothing to do with that word. It had to do with I was too lazy to find a funnier word that didn't hurt people's feelings. And, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, where it's like comics are just scared. All they want is a laugh, and if they can't get a laugh, they'll take a groan. Because it's a noise. We're just afraid of silence. That's really all it is. So if the audience goes, ooh, then we go, yeah, that's right. They can't handle the truth. I called a 9-year-old the cunt. Thanks. That was for you, Pryor. And it's like, it's not. Again, it's not edgy. But so I think telling these comedians, you know, that, again, it's not about free speech. It's like, you can find a better way to do this. Like, and I remember, like, a really good example. So I've done gay rights jokes my whole career. That was, like, my first political issue. And I think I said something, I hate to admit this, but I think I said something, not like transphobic, but something like ill-informed. This was like 6 or 7 years ago, just something ignorant about transgender people. And someone pointed it out to me. And my first response was to be like a really defensive liberal. My first response was to be like, but I do gay rights jokes. Like, of course I'm not hateful. Like, you just don't know how to take a joke. Like, you're too serious. And then I realized, I'm like, no, that was just something I didn't know about. And, you know, I researched it and I apologized. And now I try to talk about, you know, transgender issues too. You know, there's a way to do it. But I think when you hear someone go, oh, it's free speech, that's just them be like, I don't want to write another joke, you know.
I think when we all first start out, I'm maybe shouldn't speak for everyone, but I think when most comics start out and you look back at your first things that you did to get laughs, it's rather embarrassing. And I got out my notebook from my first year just a couple months ago, and oh Jesus, it was sickening. It was just bad. But I can see the naivety that I had writing it and thinking that it was really funny. But it was super simple, like you were saying. It was just completely lazy writing, and exactly what you think the crowd wants is like, another rape joke. And it's so not funny. And I don't know if I've ever apologized for it. If you guys saw me in Oklahoma back in 2007, I apologize. Okay? But I think that it's like a constant evolution that we have as performers to like push yourself to like, you have a platform, like use that fucking platform to say something worth saying, like to say something worth hearing. And I think that that should be the evolution of like a good performer, a good comic, is to like, you know, evolve your thoughts a little bit, and because I think that you are constantly evolving. I think that's inevitable. So evolve in a way that is smarter, if you can.
Troy?
I definitely agree with that. I think every comic has stuff that you think back and you're like, I don't even talk like that. Why did I write? Why did I write that? That doesn't even make sense. Like I know I had things where, you know, I convinced I was like, well, it's not actually that. This is really more like poking fun at like the kind of stuff guys say, but it was just I don't talk like that. What guys? I don't talk. I'm a guy. I don't talk like that. So why did I write that? And it was never intended as this, but I ended up just changing it because I don't talk like that. I think some people make that choice to change stuff and evolve, and other people don't. Other people kind of wallow in the, like, well, I'm being subversive. And I do think, like I said earlier, I think comedy is inherently subversive. And I think, so to the point of crossing lines, I think it depends on the line. I mean, why are you crossing that line, and what is the line, and why is that a line? If the line is there because, you're trying to protect people's feelings or trying to recognize that certain people have certain difficulties, well, that's probably a good line, and maybe we shouldn't cross it just for the sake of crossing it. But at the same time, if the line is there because it's like, this is like what the political ruling class thinks about a certain thing, and then you subvert that line, well, that's, to me, different, and that's kind of the point. So I really think it's more about just being conscious of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and being conscious of the effects that your words can have on other people, because that's really what it's all about anyway, is affecting other people, whether you're just getting them to laugh or think differently, what have you. It's all about that. So I think any comic should be evolving and should be looking out at the audience. Think about what are you saying and what are people's faces telling you about what you're saying. Right. I mean, I think a lot of people have this kind of thing where they're like, well, if people's, noses are scrunched up, oh, that's good, right? No, it's not. So there's a reason that people aren't enjoying what you're doing, and you should probably recognize that and try to change it.
All right, let's move on to another question here. Do you feel well-intentional political comedy, while informing people, can also lessen the seriousness of issues like war, poverty, and climate change? I'll answer, and then we'll start at the other end and move down this time, just to mix it up. No, I'd say no. I think any exposure is good. Any time you can raise awareness of any type of issue in any platform is actually good. Not to like lessen the horrors that are going on in this world, and there are lots of friggin' horrors going on in this world. But I think that the fact that you want, if you care about a cause, I think you want that cause to reach mass awareness, essentially. So it's like if you actually, if you have a cause and somehow you actually get to see it on television, that's great. Even if any press is good press kind of thing. In some ways, there's bad press. Obviously, we're at the Free Press Conference, but I think you want the exposure, especially if the exposure is coming from a joke that's coming from a place of solidarity, is what I would say. So, Troy?
I don't think it lessens the seriousness. I mean, especially of a serious issue. I mean, I don't really see how, if you're making jokes about people not doing things, about people having trouble getting food, like if you're commenting on, the government not doing what it should do to make sure that people can take care of themselves and make sure I don't really see how that gets rid of the seriousness of that, because it's so serious. If anything, I think it brings attention to something that maybe wouldn't be getting enough attention, and I think that's only a benefit. I don't really see how that could possibly be a negative, personally. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that for this question in particular, the first thing I thought of was The Daily Show and how it has brought political awareness to these 20-somethings that watch Comedy Central, that are there to watch fart jokes on South Park, and then it brings so much of the political world into these people's lives that would not be watching CNN or watching other networks. I think that it doesn't take the seriousness away at all. It just brings it way more to consciousness. And I think it's so clever to use people's words. You're just saying, this is what this guy said. Isn't it freaking stupid? Like, that's all they're doing, is highlighting the hypocrisy that exists and the stuff that I think that it doesn't hurt at all to make jokes about people fucking up in political stuff.
Yeah, this really bothers me a lot, because for a couple reasons. Again, I think that if you are laughing at the victims, yes, that's bad, obviously. Like, I remember when I did a tour overseas right after Obama won, literally every interview I did with press, they would go, is there part of you, like as a comedian, where you're kind of going to miss George Bush? And I'd always be like, what? And they're like, no, not like as a person, but like as a comedian, are you kind of gonna miss it because it was kind of funny? And I was like, it's not like they're acting like I sat watching TV and I was like, oh, another Afghani kid died. Give me my ha-ha pen and my chuckle notebook. You know what I mean? Like yes, I agree that. But I had someone tweet last night. This panel's turning into like people who wronged me last night. Pretty much that, where they were like, or should you be laughing about those issues? And I can sympathize if you deal with those issues more personally than I do, and and it's offensive or whatever. But to me, there's something selfish about saying that, because there are a lot of people, and we all know them, who get into these sort of political issues and groups because it's their kind of cool kids club, right? And it's not about getting other people to join the cool kids club. It's about sitting around in conference rooms and being like, hey, we're smarter than everybody else, right? Yep. Like, I do a lot of stuff with the atheist community, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of just sexist, racist assholes who sit in basements and, like, touch themselves while reading Richard Dawkins. And I would rather hang out with a Christian who wants to go occupy a bank lobby. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care about titles and stuff like that anymore. But I think that if you really care about your issue, maybe I'm not going to change your mind with my comedy, because maybe you're a humorless person. But I'm not going to change someone's mind with whatever with your intellect or with your activism. So instead of turning against each other, which liberals don't do, I'm convinced they put panels at the same time just so we would infight more. Instead of turning against each other, how about you reach the people you're going to reach with your activism? You reach the people you're going to reach with your intellectualism. I'm going to reach the people I'm going to reach with my comedy. And we just make it about not how the message is getting across, but just getting the message to as many people as possible.
Yeah, agreed across the board. And I think, besides the value of getting the message across, I think when you joke about things that are awful and horrendous, just like when we cope with personal loss, it helps us heal. On a national level, on a political level, it helps the community heal. And I think making jokes about it, as long as the intention is good, honors those tragedies.
Yeah. All right, let's hit another question here. This is an interesting one. How do you balance or account for the knowledge gaps in your audience when your comedy goes into specifics on an issue? That's rough. That's very, very rough. In fact, I can tell, I'm fairly certain most of us are very excited to actually be doing the show here tonight because we're not going to have to dumb down our sets. It's hard doing club comedy. If you're trying to do like political stuff, clubs don't want you. They just don't. And like a lot. I mean, there's some clubs that do. Granted, there's some very nice clubs, but there's a lot of clubs
There are not.
All right, I was being nice. No, there are none. But yeah, let's go. Let's start on this line too. And then we'll start with Troy and then come back this way.
I think you just try to anytime you're writing a joke, part of it is making sure that everybody's understanding what you're saying. So if you're going to talk about a knowledge gap, well, to me it seems like it's kind of your duty to fill that gap. Like you should sort of explain. Like if somebody doesn't know the issue, well, I mean, you should probably explain it. I mean, they also don't know what happened to you at the grocery store before you tell them. So it's kind of like, to me, there's a whole bunch of room in there that you can mine for punchlines and stuff in explaining something to people and sort of bringing them along. I don't really think that, to me, I think that to the extent there's a knowledge gap at the end of the joke and people were like, I don't know what you're talking about, well, that's probably because you just didn't explain it to them, and that's on you. That's how I feel about it.
I agree with what Troy said. But I feel like I've told a couple jokes before to certain crowds that it falls completely on deaf ears, and they didn't. And I think that what Troy said is a good point. Like a comic is really just a storyteller, and if you're going to tell them a story about something that you feel there's injustice somewhere, tell them the story. Like really explain what's going on and fill in that gap, if you will.
Yeah, I really like both of those. You can explain it. You can take a sentence to explain it. But again, I think this is you can fall victim to the sort of cool kids club. Like I've seen left-wing comedians who make me hate comedy and want to be a Republican. Like you don't want to be condescending. And I'm not gonna write a joke like, hey, remember that Kucinich filibuster? And like no one really wants to hear that. So I think the key, and this is what you guys were kind of getting like down about, but like if you can make things personal, I think that's really key. Like you can make political jokes personal. With me personally, I try not to use like names or talk about politicians. Like I don't like Mort Saw. I don't bring up a newspaper and be like, let's take a look-see. Like what I try to do is just talk about broader issues, right? So instead of talking about like a gay rights debate that may have happened in in the Senate, on the floor, I'll talk about just just the issue of defending people who others think are different, or I don't know. I think if you can make it broad without getting into like policy stuff. I don't think anybody wants to see a wonky comedian.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think agreed across the board. But I guess just a practical aspect of it is I think we all have very personal jokes that reach anybody. And I think, I guess myself personally, if I find myself kind of in a room where I feel like I'm going to have to explain certain things later on, I'll open with those jokes first, just so the audience knows, like, hey, trust me, I can be funny, and it kind of buys me some time to like delve into those explanations a little more.
The old political sandwich trick.
Yeah.
All right, so. Oh, she has a sandwich and a cat. Do you guys see she has a cat too? Isn't that awesome?
I'm so distracted by the cute.
I know. Awesome. It's a service. I didn't even know that existed. Okay, so let's move on.
Right. Do we have to move on? Can we just talk about cats?
All right, yeah, okay.
Because I have pictures of my cats, and one has a little Hitler mustache.
All right, let's hook up the projector and show Jamie's cats. Are there political, satirical comedians who are reaching a wide audience? I'd say Jamie, Janine, Lee Camp is amazing.
Camp is great.
I mean, like, but
NATO Green.
NATO
is
Green
phenomenal.
is amazing.
Yeah.
God, I'm blanking out on names here. I'm drunk.
Can I burn one of the only bridges I haven't burned and say something about Jon Stewart really quick? I think what Jon Stewart does is important. I think there's a gateway thing, but there's a problem with hero worship and sort of. I know Jon Stewart says he's a comedian and stuff like that, but I think one of the reasons, again, if you are an activist, the reason it is important to bring it into your comedy is because everybody thinks that Jon Stewart is as left as you can go, right? And back in the day, I thought it was a really good thing that a lot of college kids got their news from Jon Stewart. The problem is, once Obama won the election, Jon Stewart was not as critical of Obama. He constantly makes fun of Code Pink. He constantly made fun of the Occupy Wall Street activists. He's terrible. He's been terrible on Palestine. And the problem is, like, it's okay to be like, well, I'm just a comedian, blah, blah, blah. But again, you do have a certain responsibility when people watch you for news. And I think that we need to know that there are comedians like you out there, and there are comedians like Lee and stuff like that, because if you think Jon Stewart is as left as you can go, and you're a 16-year-old kid, and Jon Stewart says that Occupy kids are a bunch of smelly hippies, then you feel stupid suddenly, where you go, oh, well, if Jon's as left as I can go, and he's making fun of Occupy, then I guess, again, they are that dirty word, they are too radical. And it's like Jon Stewart had such an amazing opportunity where he got tens of thousands of kids to go to Washington, D.C. for this rally to restore sanity, and all he did was make fun of activists. He brought out Kid Rock, a Republican, who literally sang a song where the chorus is like, "Woody, I guess there's nothing much we can do, so let's just fuck it." Like, it was horrible. It was like the antithetical Martin Luther King. It was the worst thing I've ever seen. And like, if you want to call yourself a comedian, fine, but don't have tens of thousands of kids go to Washington, D.C. so you can tell them that being lazy makes you cool. Like, if you have all of those kids, have them do something besides buy your stupid fucking Daily Show mug. Sorry.
And I actually all right, again, I was blanking on names. Negin Farsad, great, amazing comedian. Elon James White, great, amazing comedian. Baratunde Thurston, amazing comedian. Katie Halper. But the problem with a lot of these folks are, again, we don't get a whole lot, like, doing political comedy is not that lucrative, other than the few people who are on television. It's because there's not money in being good that much. There's not money in doing kind of activist comedy, and that's where we actually kind of need you guys more to actually help get kind of the critical mass that, like, because Kamau got on television because there was a lot of people really backing him up. There was all this all over Twitter. This guy is amazing, and he's funny, and he's righteous, and he's awesome, and you need to see him, and he needs to be on television. And there was this groundswell, and then he got a part-time, a weekly show on FX, and then because of even more groundswell, they're going to a full-time show, and that's because of badasses saying to FX, this should be on every single solitary night because these voices need to be heard. Yep. Any other comics that we want to add to this?
I consider Maria Bamford an extremely political comic. Yeah. She's amazing, and she does it in a way where most people don't realize it's incredibly political and subversive.
Yeah, over in the, I'm going to be that guy. That's like in the UK. But in the UK, Stuart Lee.
Oh, he's so good.
Stuart Lee is an amazing comedian, and he wrote Jerry Springer the Opera and was like protested by like tens of thousands of Christians, and it was amazing. But Stuart Lee, I got my inspiration about this sort of this political correctness stuff from Stuart Lee because, you know, the Edinburgh Festival is this really big festival overseas where all the comedians go. And everyone's theme this one year was like, all the names of their show were like, too dangerous for TV. Like, I'm shitting on the rule book. I hate women. Like, it was all of this, just, I can say whatever I want. And again, it was just like easy, horrible rape jokes, racist cliches, stuff like that. And so Stuart Lee actually did the only edgy thing you could have done in the festival, which is he stuck up for political correctness. And he talked about, again, how important it is and stuff like that. So he's really brilliant. Some other UK comedians, Robin Ince is another political comedian over there that's really good. Daniel Kitson isn't that, again, political, but he tells stories about, like, love, which will make you cry. And to me, I think that's a really rebellious political act as well. Yeah, he's a comedian. He's amazing.
We've also been told there's an awesome disabled activist comic named Josh Blue, so check him out and stuff. Yeah.
He's great.
Yeah,
he's local as well?
He's
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, so if you live here, you definitely should check him out. So anyone want anything to add to that one, or should we move on? Okay, so I'm going to...
I didn't know we were allowed to take bathroom breaks.
What?
Yeah, Chris.
I didn't hear that.
Oh, Hurricane Debolu, who's here, and he'll be performing
Oh, yeah, no,
tonight.
he's badass. Yeah, he's awesome.
Are you guys all coming? Are you guys coming to the show tonight? The stand-up show? Cool.
Right.
Okay.
Good.
I also want to mention Natasha Muse. She's a Bay Area trans comic, and she's phenomenal. She's so good.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to kind of combine two. This is from Twitter from Teddyfish, and then one from the fine woman with the awesome cat down here. So Teddyfish asked, do you worry, especially with satire, that people will get what you say 180 degrees wrong? And she asks, is it better to have folks laugh with you than against you or with them, essentially? So kind of thoughts on, I guess, the structuring of comedy and how comedy might be able to be, your comedy might be misunderstood.
Well, I think, like, sort of evolve. I think you get better at that kind of stuff. But additionally, I think sometimes, I think you can try to be satirical and you can miss it and just end up offending people or whatever, and that's not really that's not really a goal. You're not really accomplishing anything. So sometimes I think you just have to go, I guess I just lose this one and change it. I don't really, I mean, sometimes there's just certain things that, maybe making the satirical point you want to make isn't worth the possible misunderstanding that could come from it. And, I mean, there's always more jokes. You can always try to do it a different way. You can always just change it. I think generally, to me, comedy's about people enjoying themselves. I mean, I'm not really trying to have people not having a good time in my show, but me, being like, well, I really made some really good points, though. Like, I don't really see what the purpose of that is. So for me, it's kind of a thing where I think to the extent that the satirical point that you're making is also making people laugh and is an enjoyable part of the show, I think that's great. Once that's out the window, to me, it's just not worth it.
I mean, you do have a responsibility, I think. I always think about it where if I sound condescending or preachy or anything like that, because I'm writing about these political issues that I care a lot about, I know if I'm not funny about it, or if I sound like I'm talking down to you, or I sound like a dick, then not only are they not going to find it funny, but then they're going to use that as almost an excuse to like resent the issue more. Like a really good example is like, so I'm vegan, and nothing, like, I probably made half this room hate me by just saying that. Nothing makes people more mad. You can be at the most liberal 350.org sponsored by Noam Chomsky event, and you go, hey, does anyone have a salad? And people are like, God damn it, it's fucking vegans. But I really care about the issue, so I have to be really careful about that. But then you have groups like PETA who do these terrible sexist ads, and I see my left-wing friends who maybe secretly know they should be vegan because of, factory farming and stuff. And the second PETA does something terrible and sexist, they get on Twitter and they're very excited. But they're like, see, PETA's stupid, so I'm going to eat a steak because I hate PETA because I hate women. And and they start resenting, I'm not pro-PETA, I'm pro-animal. So, so I don't want to be the PETA stand-up comedians. I don't want to sound like such an asshole that someone goes, oh, see, all liberals are these sort of elitist, condescending, whatever other code word they can use for Jew. I'm Jewish.
Apologize.
Free Palestine.
Anything to add, Janine? No? Okay. All right. Let's. I guess it's sort of. This will be quick. Since they asked, Are there any good internet sources for good contemporary political, environmental comedy and jokes? Citizen Radio is a good one.
I'll take that.
You can watch a bunch of clips from Kamau's show online. You can listen to my show. My show's a little more serious, actually, but...
Yeah, I think the internet is amazing. I think you can go on any site that you enjoy, like Jezebel, Color Lines, and if you go in the search bar and Google comedy or comedians, a lot of these sites have highlighted people that they believe in, and that's a great way to find comics that would speak to you.
Yeah. Any particular one that comes to mind? I'm kind of blanking, but I think just... Yeah, Google. I don't know.
Citizen Radio.
So let's see. Lisa Graves from Center for Media and Democracy on Twitter asks, actually, Janine, making a point that Janine made, that we should get comedians into campaigns sooner. What about a regular comedian lab to confer with you all? So I think that's a great idea. But that's a big idea. Let's talk about the big issue of, we've kind of talked about comedy and how great it is or how horrible it is and all the different aspects of this. Let's all discuss up here how can we better engage with the progressive community? How can the progressive community better engage with us? What are ways that we can and should be connecting with the broader progressive world? How can they reach out to us in kind of the bigger picture kind of ways? Start here, or anyone want to start?
I just think I would say accessibility as a performer, like having being accessible to your audience after you've said what you needed to say, like having them be able to contact you or book you or use you further for that. I think to remain accessible is what I would say.
Tweet us, everybody. We hate ourselves. Just tell us we're funny, and we'll be your friend forever.
I think the onus falls on each camp. So I think comedians, the onus is on us personally to keep on top of the issues and make connections with you guys. And I think on the other side with progressive groups, the onus is to kind of understand how comedy works. Because a lot of times, I've had experience with this. A lot of times I'll be booked for a show and it's an organization I love and I'm so excited, and then I get to the space and it's like 3 PM and there's kids there and I'm like, oh, you don't know how stand-up comedy works. You just think you can wedge it anywhere. So I think just understanding the culture of stand-up comedy and respecting that when you bring us on board.
I don't know, we're kind of killing this 9 a.m. panel.
Nice.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say let artists do what we do. I mean, I think we kind of covered it with the person who was like mad that we would use comedy with like their political issues or whatever. Be like, again, like it's about the issue and it's about reaching as many people as possible, and comedy is a good way to do that. And I think the biggest thing, a lot of times people think comedians are like, they do like roasts and stuff like that, and we're not all roast comics. And I mean, you can find any kind of comedian you want. Like they're out there, and I don't know. I mean, I had angry answers for everything else, but like we're kind of doing it here this weekend, and I think this is a really good example of like what it could be. And unless you guys don't laugh at my shit tonight at the show, then I'm just gonna be like, fuck activists.
I would say like so prior to hosting my talk show that I host now, which everyone's plugging their stuff, I might as well too. It's MatthewF.net, because I don't expect you to know how to spell Filipowicz. So MatthewF.net. Before doing my talk show, my background, I actually used to do web animations. I worked for this company called Heads Up. I was actually the only employee of this company called Heads Up, and I made these daily satirical political cartoons. And through that, that's actually how I kind of even I was always somewhat political, but that's how I kind of got involved with the Progressive Net Roots. I ended up started going to conferences because of that, and then kind of evolved to what I do now. But like, I mean, I've worked with a lot of different organizations. I made like videos for ACLU, Move On, a bunch of different progressive groups that approach me to make content for them. And for one, I would say if you have a progressive group, ask. Be willing to pay something because it's work. Especially if you're a labor group. Unions actually don't have that problem. When a union asks you, it's like, well, we're a labor union. We are going to pay you for your labor. So be able. Usually activist comics will give you a lowball figure because we believe in the cause. I can't speak for everybody, but I know I would if personally. But
we just want some of that sweet Soros cash, y'all.
Exactly.
Come on, hook it up.
But I would say that if you're a group that is reaching out to a comic to help out with something, realize why you're reaching out to a comic, and then trust the comic. Because I'm not going to name names of any specific organizations. There's a couple that I've specifically worked with where it was a specific campaign, and I wrote, in my opinion, a very, very funny script. And it's a very funny script. And it clears with them. It's like, oh, this is great. This is really, really funny. And I was doing animation, and animation is really, really time-consuming and takes a lot of time. You have to move everything around. It's hard. So then, okay, cleared it. I recorded the audio. Does audio sound good? Audio's great. Go for it. I did the animation, which takes forever. And then they're like, well, this is a little too hardcore. Why don't we change this? And it's like they changed the entire message of the video. And it's like, and it's not like animation you can like just go and reshoot it, It's like this is like all these little parts of this had to get set up to actually work. And then they cut it down. And so if you're a progressive group that approaches a comic, you approach them for a reason. Trust them. They're the comics. They know what they're doing. And that's fine to get a little bit of clearance beforehand and like say, this is the boundaries of what we're trying to go to. But once you give them the clearance, let them do their jobs. And because that's why you hired them in the first place. That would be my advice to orgs out there.
Yeah. You just said we're funnier than them, essentially. We're funnier than you guys.
Yeah.
We're not.
Anything else to add to that stuff?
I have to pee.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Is that where you went?
Oh my God.
I almost just trailed right after you. I've never been pee jealous before, but when I saw you leaving, I was just like, oh, to be her.
We have a couple more questions here. Let's see. And then we're almost out of time here, too. So do you think comedy has changed over the years? I mean, yeah, society's changed over the years. Comedy's certainly evolved. But maybe let's talk about how maybe the evolution of political comedy, because, that has actually changed fairly substantially. Bye, Jamie.
It's going to feel so good. You're going to
Drops the mic and leaves.
I do, and I think it's changed in the point that Jamie made earlier because of social media, because of the ability for us to kind of do it ourselves, that there are a wider variety of voices out there able to reach their audience. And so I think there's a great opportunity for all kinds of niche comics and different voices.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, you guys?
I think it's changed a lot, definitely. I think that political comedy, to me, seems a lot stronger than I think it was for a while. And I think part of that is the power that comes from it, and new media. Additionally, just the cable networks and all that kind of stuff all see what you can get from it. I mean, I can't tell you how many articles I've seen about the right wing looking for like their, Daily Show, and it's always terrible, always, it's never good. But I think they wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't a thing that they recognize had a lot.
Oh yeah, Mark Twain. It's evolved from I'm sure we can find cavemen who were satirical, I would imagine, but but modern, you go from Twain to Lenny Bruce to Carlin to Hicks. I mean, there is a vast evolution. But now that we do have, I actually think your point is really great, and actually what actually ties into what we're doing right here at the National Conference for Media Reform, and why, so a lot of us, our careers actually would not exist without the net right now, and without the way media is structured right now. It's not like people are beating down the doors to let liberal progressive comics have shows. And so the fact of the matter is that's why we're so tied into stuff like net neutrality, because if net neutrality goes away, they won't be able to listen to our radio shows. They won't be able to see our videos that we make. It really just sort of, the whole leveling the playing field will be destroyed. And so, for us as comics and artists, we have an active interest in keeping things like net neutrality around, because if it goes away, we're fucked. Yeah. I mean,
well, and this doesn't just apply. I thought about this in the bathroom. This doesn't just apply. This doesn't just apply to comedians. I mean, it's all about I mean, this might have been said, but it's not about how people's voices have changed. But because of the internet, if someone says we're not going to give you this book deal because it's too radical, you can say, fuck you, I'm going to write a blog. If someone says you can't say that on the radio, you can say, fuck you, I'm starting a podcast. If somebody's not going to book you at a comedy club, you can go play. I'm trying not to play mainstream comedy clubs anymore. So I'm going to go to Kentucky, and there is a converted church that's now a punk rock club, and I'm going to go play there, and I'm going to support them. And I think any of you, we all now have the power to be an important voice. I don't need to get on Comedy Central anymore. I don't, as you saw by my Jon Stewart tirade. We don't need them. And they know that, and that scares them, but we don't need managers anymore. We don't need agents anymore. We don't need lit agents anymore. We don't need television deals. We don't need development deals. We don't need any of that because, again, we have each other, we have the internet, we have word of mouth, and I think word of mouth is so much stronger than any kind of, being in a Walmart commercial or, cheapening your act just to get on television. We don't need to do that anymore.
And at the Just for Laughs Festival a couple years ago, Patton Oswalt gave the keynote at this industry event where all of these networks and agents and stuff were there, and essentially said that for an hour.
Yeah.
And for one of the biggest comedians in the industry right now to go in front of those people and say, we don't need you.
Sure.
So listen up to what we're doing and get on board before we leave you in the dust. Speaks volumes.
Yeah.
We don't need them, but we actually need you guys. So guys, thank you so much for coming to our panel. Give it up for Troy Walker, Kristin Rand, Jamie Kilstein, Janine Brito. I'm Matt Filipowicz. Come up and talk to us. Thanks a lot, guys. Come to the show tonight. Bye.